that line into Russia. And of course, Murmansk, the more known one. So that was a colossal struggle. In some ways, you could characterize it as good and evil, though I wouldn't do that. It's too simple, but you could. What is he talking about the Arab and the Persian world for in that regard? Is he saying he's got to eradicate them or destroy them before they will come into the modern world and be like Israel? Oh, please don't be like Israel. I grant you that I'd like to see Riyadh brought into the modern world. I'd like to see MBS successful. So there's no analogy here. There's no metaphor even. There's no comparison. And then the second thing is, listen to what he says he's going to do with Hamas. Mr. Netanyahu, I have news for you. As a 30-year plus military professional, I have news for you. You are not going to destroy Hamas, period. You are killing a lot of people who really don't have a whole lot to do with Hamas, especially those children, but you are not going to destroy Hamas. So we destroyed the Japanese imperial state. We destroyed the Third Reich so thoroughly that its leader, the Fuhrer, committed suicide in his bunker. You're not going to do that to Hamas. You are not going to destroy their Reich. You're not going to destroy their imperial mindset. It's not imperial. It's a mindset of a small group of people who have been dispossessed, indeed are being dispossessed, and resort to terror in order to combat it. You are not going to destroy that. You will never destroy that. Have we destroyed Al-Qaeda? Look at the bombs we dropped in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, Syria, Libya. Have we destroyed Al-Qaeda? Hell no. Ali Soufan knows Al-Qaeda better than anybody who speaks English. He's Lebanese by birth, but he's Lebanese-American, was an FBI agent. Talented guy. Al-Qaeda's grown. It's bigger than it was on 9/11. It's got more members than it had on 9/11. You do not destroy terrorism. So that was a preposterous answer. And I would love to hear how Elon Musk, if he's as smart as people tell me he is, I suspect that sometimes when I hear him talk, how he would have responded to that had he been free to do so. Or if he did, and it just didn't get recorded. Because that was an absurd statement by Netanyahu. In fact, it makes me think that what I'm hearing about him, that he's losing it, is more and more true.
We had the National Security Minister of Israel. On Tuesday, he threatened to break apart the government if Israel does not restart its war with Hamas. What are these guys are looking for, in your opinion? Why they're so insistent on fighting Hamas when, in fact, they're not fighting Hamas? The mission is turning something else. How many Hamas forces have been killed?
Even if the Israeli figures are correct, and let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures. I've been in the government too long to know that the Israelis are patent liars. In their intelligence community, in their propaganda community, certainly, and in their leadership, they are inveterate liars. Let me say that again. They are liars. So you can't believe anything that comes out of Jerusalem. It's all propaganda if it's during a conflict time like it is right now. And it's rarely ever true. But your question is a good question. I doubt very seriously that they have killed more than several hundred, perhaps. Probably, in my estimate, less than that. Real fighters. That means there's a whole lot of them left. But if there's one left, the idea is left. They're not going to destroy them. They're not going to destroy them. So here's the dilemma I have with his comments and his strategy. Although I know what his strategy underneath is, it is to kill as many Palestinians as possible, get them off as much of the land as possible in Gaza, and release Ben-Gvir and his settler contingents, whom they're now arming. They were carrying shotguns and old rifles before in the West Bank and killing Palestinians with them. But now they're arming them. They're arming them with state-of-the-art firearms. They're going to move in as soon as things quiet down and the rubble's a little less smoky. They're going to move in and start colonizing Gaza the same way they've colonized the West Bank. They're doing East Jerusalem and the Golan. And East Jerusalem, I heard from one of my Christian friends in Jerusalem, who incidentally said to me in 2002, I think it was 2002, when Powell went to Ramallah to meet with Arafat the first time. He said to me, Larry, the most dangerous enemy we have in this region, this is a Christian prelate. The most dangerous enemy we have in this region is the Jews. I'm not saying it to be anti-Semitic. He said, it's the Israelis. They are our biggest enemy. I fear them. I fear them confiscating my land. I fear them confiscating the church's money. I fear them all the time. I fear them more than anyone else. I said, Bishop, you got to be kidding me. He said, no. The number one enemy of my church in that region is Israel. So Jerusalem is getting ready to explode. East Jerusalem is getting ready to explode from everything I'm hearing. He's going to do the same thing in Gaza. His strategy is clear now. He had none originally, but now he's an opportunist par excellence. So now he's going to colonize Gaza step by step, acre by acre, the same way he's done the other areas and is still doing the other areas. And we're going to sit back once the ceasefire occurs and it's permanent and no one's dropping bombs or whatever. We're going to say, oh, look, everything's fine now, just like we've been doing for the last 20 years. And he's going to continue to march. But Daniel Levy said something today. I think he was in Lisbon. Daniel's a smart guy. You may know him. He was at the European Parliament for a while in their foreign relations group. And now he's head of the Middle East group that's in London. And Daniel said, and I want to quote it to you, the outside world must walk Israel back from the abyss. It cannot be a part of the choir of incitement. Well, I wanted to say to Daniel, and I did send him an email, Daniel, that's exactly the way I feel, except for one thing. The only people in the choir of incitement are the United States and some of its allies. The rest of the world is increasingly outside that choir and singing a song that says, like Erdogan today, Mr. Netanyahu, what did he call him? The butcher of Gaza, he called him. That's a head of state anchoring the southern flank of NATO, however tentative that position might be right now, saying to another leader of another state in the Mediterranean, you're a butcher. Now, you can't go all much longer in the choir if that's what you're saying. So Erdogan isn't in the choir. And if you look around the world, there are quite a few leaders now who've said what they've said, and they aren't in the choir either. So my only change to Daniel, my suggestion was, we're the choir. We and a few of our allies are the choir. No one else is singing this tune. Listen, we're becoming as much a pariah as Israel. We're becoming a subject of detestation. There's no better word for it, as Israel is. We're becoming a pariah. And we've already lost so much of our reputational power with torture, with a war crime in Iraq, war crimes in Iraq, with the war in Afghanistan, 20 years of bloodletting and nothing to show for it, with the disaster in Libya. We're in Syria against the head of state of a constituted state. He doesn't want us there, and we're just there. And we're there for nefarious purposes. We're protecting oil flowing to Israel. We're protecting oil flowing to Israel. Forget about fighting ISIS. That's why we're there. So this is crazy. This is insane. We're becoming isolated. We're becoming a superpower that has no friends. That's no way to live in the world, not in today's world, not when you need cooperation and collaboration to meet a number of challenges, not the least of which is nuclear weapons, found a new life now, and the climate crisis. You can't do these really existential tasks if you're bogged down in all these things that are just the subject of your stupidity. And Daniel said something else. I listened to another man too yesterday on a webinar. I got to get his book. His book is called The Lost Peace. He's a professor at Kent University in England. Written a number of books on Russia. Richard Sakwa. And he said, let me quote him, because this is just so good. He said, the irresponsibility of Western leaders, this is a direct quote, the irresponsibility of Western leadership is one of the striking, bizarre features of the post-Cold War world. He's absolutely right. And he said, the amazing lack of imagination in Washington, D.C. stuns me. Bingo. True. I listened to Tony Blinken about an hour ago. The press conference was about 4 hours old when I listened to it. And I listened to the people asking questions in the audience. I want to jump in their chair and ask the question myself because they're so freaking ignorant, these newspaper people. They never ask the right questions. They never follow up with the right question. They just sit there and prate. The answers that he gave, even under those circumstances, were so inconsequential, so demonstrative of what Richard is saying, a lack of imagination. Oh, everything's going to be all right. We're going to get our hostages back, and we're going to probably extend this ceasefire a little bit, and everything is going to be all right. I mean, they've got to destroy Hamas. Mr. Secretary, did you hear what you said? They've got to destroy Hamas. Let me tell you, it is an utter impossibility to destroy Hamas. You can't destroy Al-Qaeda. You can't destroy ISIS. You can't destroy Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat Islamiyah, any of these terrorist groups the worldwide who have a reason to be terrorists. You can't destroy them. You'd have to go in and eradicate their children, eradicate their babies, eradicate the idea, most of all, that they're opposed to India or opposed to Pakistan or opposed to the leadership in wherever, Myanmar, Burma, whatever. You can't eradicate people. Mr. Secretary, are you listening to yourself? Are you listening to yourself? You're stating the impossible as a objective of diplomacy and foreign policy of the number one power in the world. Are you listening to yourself? And Jake Sullivan's no better. If anything, he's more lacking imagination. And Biden is no better. Joe Biden is a cretin as far as I'm concerned when it comes to his ability to affect diplomacy. I've got to say, it must be his age, because I know Joe was not all this bad. You know, he wasn't the greatest in the world, but he was not all this bad when he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So something, it's the people surrounding him, it's his age or whatever. But again, I come back to Richard. There's no imagination. There is absolutely no thought about reality. There's just thought about this world that they think they live in, and they do not. There's nothing more dangerous than that, especially when you're possessed still of so much latent power and you don't know what to do with it, and you don't know how to wield it, and you don't know how to use it. And that's where we are now. That's where Washington is today, leaderless for all intents and purposes. And we got a country at the head of the Levant that's so small, so tiny that you could probably put New York's Jewish population in it and double it. And it's leading us by the nose as if we were a bull in a china shop with a ring in that nose. And Netanyahu's the leader. And this is preposterous. It's utterly preposterous. Levy said it right. We've got to stop. We have got to stop this. Israel's on the edge of the abyss. I agree. I don't think Daniel's right. I don't think we're going to stop Netanyahu, and I think Israel's going to go into the abyss. That's the reason I said 2 years ago that in 20 years Israel wouldn't be a state. I think it may happen even sooner, because you cannot go on the way they're going. This isn't South Africa. This isn't South Africa. You know, you could bring Barghouti out of prison and make him head of the PA, and you could say, well, look, we did the same thing that South Africa did. You know, they brought their man out of Devil's Island. We brought our man out of jail, and he's going to be the PA leader, and we're going to have a two-state solution, and he's going to make sure that on that side there's some leadership. Well, they're never going to do that because they know Barghouti's smart. He's not a Mahmoud Abbas. And Barghouti will actually build a Palestinian Authority into some kind of power that can actually negotiate and come up with a deal. That's what they fear. And so they're not about to do that. They're not about to allow him. He may do it from prison. He may run from prison. You may have seen that Abbas sent his emissary there recently to try and talk him out of standing for the position, because they know he'd get elected. The polls are showing that he would get elected. That would be a smart leader in the PA, and the PA then could provide some real leadership for Gaza and other Palestinian groups. And you might, if the Israelis accepted that, you might have a possibility of effecting some kind of peaceful solution. That's what we're after. We're after peace. Netanyahu is not after peace. As Joseph Avazar says every Sunday on our every other Sunday on our IPC simulation, the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation, now running for 2 years, they're not interested in peace. That's Joseph's whole motivation in doing what he's doing, proposing this government over the other governments in Israel, is because he said the governments that exist, Hamas, PA, and Israel, are not interested in peace, and they proved it for 40 freaking years. Therefore, I want to impose a government on top of them whose sole purpose in life is peace. That's the only way you would ever do it. And so what we're proposing is almost fantastic because Netanyahu and the Israelis would never allow it.
How influential the Biden administration could be to extend this humanitarian pause that is going on right now. Is that possible in your opinion?
It'll all depend on the calculations that are aided and abetted by the Israeli intelligence people and the IDF and others, and Netanyahu's judgment of those evaluations as to how much advantage he can gain from that. And that's political advantage because he's being really harassed by people who have relatives that are hostages, both externally and internally. And I'm sure he cares more about the internal ones than others, regardless of what he might say. So it'll depend on his domestic political calculations and where he is in his strategy of leveling enough of Gaza that Ben-Gvir can have success when he gets in there. And there are others. I keep singling out Ben-Gvir because he's kind of the head guy right now. He's the face at the head of it all. But there are lots of others too. So when he unleashes those people and they start colonizing northern Gaza and keeping the people in the south of Gaza from returning, then we'll see what unfolds in terms of opposition to that. Because I don't think they're going to be met with no resistance when they do that too. But look what they've done in the West Bank, and look what they're about to do in East Jerusalem. They're meeting resistance, but they're eliminating that resistance. In some cases, they're killing it. So I think that's going to be his calculation. What advantage politically, domestically accrues to me, and what advantage accrues to me in carrying out this now newly developed strategy for Gaza. And I'll decide on the humanitarian pause, if you will, its depth and its length based on that. But I'm not going to do a ceasefire because a ceasefire would fly in the face of all of that. It would not leave him at a point where he could say, I'm ready now. I'm ready to let everything go. We'll have a ceasefire maybe when that comes, but we're not there yet. He's not killed enough people yet.
As he mentioned, he's looking for de-radicalization of Gaza. How you can kill people and turn each and every family into a potential member of Hamas, and how do you want to de-radicalize that? Is there any sector in the Biden administration giving some advices to Israelis? Are they willing to take these advices? It's so important, this communication.
I think there are probably some. I know one of them, and one of them with the most influential and even eloquent voice is Bill Burns. And I'm glad to see that even though he is mal-positioned as director of the CIA to be the diplomat that he is, he's the only diplomat in the Biden administration, period. End of sentence. That's it. He's the only real diplomat. And he's kind of a Sergei Vieira de Mello diplomat. He's very courageous, he's very brave, and he's very good. You know, Sergio was probably the world's finest diplomat when he was killed in Iraq. Walked into the Pol Pot's camps by himself, effected a ceasefire with the Khmer Rouge. I mean, he was an incredible guy. East Timor, incredible diplomat. Well, that's kind of the way Bill Burns is, but he's so mal-positioned right now. But he's in the middle of it. I understand he's in Qatar right now talking with the different parties with regard to the hostages and such. But if he were the top guy, if he were the Secretary of State, we'd be seeing an entirely different approach, in my view, an approach we could explain and understand, and that would show some imagination and would be bending Netanyahu's arm behind his back so bad that Bibi would be crying every night. But that's not happening because we don't have anybody with that kind of skill and talent and courage, moral courage. So we're leaderless. So Richard's right. He's never seen anything so bizarre. And I agree with him. We had a chance. His whole book about the lost peace, his whole book is that it was when I was there at the heart of things. I saw Gorbachev. I saw Shevardnadze. I saw Yeltsin. I saw Jim Baker, and I saw Colin Powell, and I saw Ronald Reagan, and to whom Powell was the final national security advisor and was on Long Island with Gorbachev, was in St. Catherine's Palace with Gorbachev when Gorbachev said, "I know who you are," in English. "I know who you are. Underneath that civilian suit is a uniform. What are you going to do now? Because your devil is gone." Yeah. Powell was convinced that this was a rare moment in history for us to effect a complete rapprochement as we ended the Cold War and didn't prate about it, didn't beat our chest about it. And his president agreed with him. He agreed with him completely. And his national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft, and Jim Baker, his Secretary of State, agreed too. And we were embarked. We had every reason to believe Russia would be a member of NATO within a decade, at least the political alliance, and then eventually, if we kept it, and we weren't sure we were going to do that, the military alliance. And Europe would be whole in one, finally. And everybody's going to get along. Hell no. But it would be a different situation than anyone ever imagined. And it would be a concert of Europe that would bring the kind of peace after Napoleon was knocked out. 100 years roughly of no wars in Europe, no problems in Europe till you get to Hitler. And then it just fell apart. It fell apart. And I think why it fell apart. I saw it fall apart, and I know it involved all manner of shenanigans by the United States, from financial shenanigans in Moscow that orchestrated the fire sale of the old communist industrial base to a few of the oligarchs for incredible prices and fees, to Yeltsin's irresponsibility as a leader. But most of the blame lies, in my view, with Bill Clinton and the presidents who succeeded him and brought the Cold War back. And that's, I assume, what the subject of this book is. I can't wait to read it. But what a loss that was. What a colossal loss that was. And fundamentally, the fault lies with Washington. The fault lies with Washington, just as the fault lies with Washington for what happened in Ukraine. I'm not excusing Putin's invasion, but I am saying that's why he invaded. He just made a statement. His statement in Russian translated, I'm told, I don't speak Russian, was that it's not about territory, it's about security. And he said it in some frustration. An imaginative diplomat in Germany, in France, oh God, in Washington, would have leapt on that like a dog on a bone and said, the man is telling us that he doesn't want Ukraine. What he wants is security. What he wants is no nuclear-capable missiles on Ukraine's border pointed at Moscow. Do you know how short a distance that is? What he wants is no creep into his sphere of influence. No creeping into Georgia. No creeping into Ukraine. None of that. That's what he's telling you. You have the foundation for negotiations and a ceasefire right now. That's all you need. Go do it. Eat some crow and do it. Do we have anybody in Washington with the imagination, with the talent, with the juices of a real diplomat to do that? No, we don't. They don't even recognize what he said.
Recently, Lloyd Austin visited Kiev. What are the reasons behind this trip?
I frankly don't know. And I'm not impressed with Austin either. So I don't know. But if I were the Secretary of Defense and I could get the imprimatur from my commander-in-chief, that is to say, I wouldn't be violating too badly his idea of what his policy is, I would be talking to Zelensky in the manner that I just described. Putin just made this statement. You're not going to lose any territory. We're going to have to eat some crow, the most indigestible portion of which will be we'll have to recognize Russia's sovereignty over Crimea. But we're going to trade Kosovo for that. If you'll recognize Kosovo, you never have, we'll recognize your sovereignty over Crimea. And oh, by the way, we'll sign up to whatever you and Zelensky can agree to, and we'll turn to Zelensky and say, you better agree to it. With regard to the Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine who might still want to be a part of Russia. I'm not sure there are too many that want to do that now and have some kind of referendum. And if we have to, we set up some kind of DMZ. If there is a division between Russian speakers and they're wanting autonomy or affiliation with Moscow or Kiev and no autonomy, whatever they want, if we have to set something up and put troops in there from the UN to monitor it for a while, 75 years is okay with me as long as no one's getting killed, then let's do it. But let's come to a solution. I don't even think now, after hearing what Putin said and understanding as I do now just how deep and how capable Russia's industrial base is. For a while there, I had some concerns about it because I knew from my conversations with old Warsaw Pact generals and Powell's conversations with them that they were afraid that that colossal industrial base that they had maintained, and it is colossal. There's only 2 other countries in the world that equal it. China now probably surpasses it slightly in certain areas like shipbuilding. And us, and we're way third. We're way third. Our industrial base, we can't build but about 1 ship a year. Chinese can build 6 a month. So that's how much their deep defense industrial base is as compared with ours. Russia's has been taken out of mothballs, if you will, and oiled, and is working fine now. They are making so many artillery rounds now, they could shoot them from now until doomsday and not run out. That's the Russia I know. That's the Russia that Stalin bequeathed to everyone with this hardcore conventional industrial base. And of course, then they built the nuclear too. But it's just so one-sided now. And Putin knows that. He knows that. And I look today, even our Western analysts are saying their growth is 2.5% in this past fiscal year. It was going to be 0. It was going to be less than 0. They were going to tube, you know. They're not tubing. They're not tubing at all. In fact, in some ways, their economy has learned from and is doing better because of what we've done to them in terms of sanctions and everything. This is crazy. This cannot go on. It should not go. It can go on because we've got idiots in Washington. But it should not go on. It should not. People are dying and they've lost. And the time is ripe for making that loss not quite as bad as it could be if we let another year go by. We let another year go by, the whole dynamics may change. And Putin may change his statement and may say this is about territory because territory equals security. And I need a little bit of your country.
There is an article in Politico just recently is talking about the Europeans have to offer a Ukraine deal that Trump can't refuse. It seems that they have to bribe Trump to just backing Europeans to backing the war in Ukraine. They're assuming that Trump would win. Nobody knows who's going to be the next president of the US. And the Republican right now can have the upper hand in the next election.
Charles Koch just threw all of his support and money, which is considerable, behind Nikki Haley. He very much disappointed Rick DeSantis, who thought he was going to get it. I never thought Koch would go DeSantis, but I didn't think he would go with anyone. I thought he would just keep his powder dry and watch and influence things as they develop. But he is now committed to Nikki Haley. That means to me that he is determined, and he's a pretty astute guy. I don't care for him too much, but he's a pretty astute guy, and he's a multi-billionaire. That means he's decided that the Republicans can win, but they can't win with Trump. And so he's going with Haley. He probably picked, I won't say that she's palatable because I don't care for her at all. I know her as UN ambassador, and she just depressed me there. But he probably picked the least dangerous one of the Republicans out there, with the exception of Chris Christie. But I think he's done. He's just not sellable as the chief executive. So I think probably that means Koch has determined Trump is dead in the water, no matter what the polls say, no matter what New York Times, Siena polls. And you know what the New York Times, Siena polls are doing? They're fixing the polls to scare the Democrats so they'll go to the ballot box. That's old hat in America. And New York Times is the old hat. These polls show that Trump's leading by 10% or 12% or 6% or whatever. That's to scare the Democrats and get them into the ballot box, because that's the big problem they have with them, particularly now that Biden has alienated the progressives. And every day that goes by, that he shows no imagination with regard to Israel, he pushes another 100,000 progressives away from him. And he can't win without them. He simply cannot win without them. No Democrat can. So this is shaping up to be a real battleground election, I think, because I think it's going to be Haley and Biden or someone like Haley and Biden. I don't think it's going to be Donald Trump. So that, if I'm wrong, let me come back and try to answer it. If Trump were to come back, I think Trump will be so dedicated, so committed to murdering his enemies as best and as fast as he can. He won't give a crap about Ukraine. He won't even pay any attention to it. Now, the fiscal situation in this country is getting so bad that we actually have our treasury notes being dumped by the Japanese and the Chinese now. We have $1 trillion worth of defense budget. Actually, the national security budget, which includes everything, is about 1.6 trillion. We have $1 trillion shaping up for this next year in interest payments on our $33 trillion aggregate debt. Those two figures will eliminate any discretionary federal spending whatsoever. That's the reason the Republicans are looking at Social Security. That's the reason they're looking at healthcare. They're looking at anything they can find to cut, except the defense budget, which they love, because we are broke and we're living on borrowed time with other people borrowing our debt or paying for our debt mainly through the treasury notes. When they start dumping those notes to the point of, really harmful measures, we're going to have to tuck ourselves in and do a lot of things very differently. And we're going to have to do it fairly swiftly, or we're going to have a crash that's going to make the 2007, 2008 one look small by comparison. It's not going to be housing. It's going to be virtually everything. If that is threatening DOD, and it is, and they know it, not just the recruiting problems, but also the fact that they can't really solve those problems. I don't think they would anyway, but they'd want to double the bonuses they're paying. They'd want to pay these 18-year-olds instead of $50,000, $100,000 to solve their recruiting problems. They were way short this year. Short partially last year. They were way short this year, and the reserves were paying. The Army Reserve was 40% short on its numbers. You can't keep doing that and think you're going to fight China. So Austin might be taking a different tack, and Biden might have approved it with Zelensky. Like, we got to end this. We got to end this. We got to figure a way out, and we got to have your help in doing it. He might be doing that because he knows how perilous his own fiscal situation is. Hell, you probably saw for the 16th or 17th year, the DOD couldn't do an audit. They couldn't pass an audit. That's because they're washing money that is wasted all the time. They can't do an audit because they have wasted that money. They don't want to fess up on what they've done, and they don't want to fess up on what that means in terms of the future, because they know, regardless of how much money the defense contractors funnel into the Congress to get them to vote for more money for DOD, that if there's no money there, it ain't going to work. And that's where we're approaching. We're approaching a point where there's not going to be any money in the bank.
How about Europe? Do you see any backup plan in Europe? There is an article in Politico. They're talking about that Europeans gonna buy ammunition for Ukraine from third countries.
Well, first of all, they're just getting more Ukrainians killed. Probably some Russians too, but they're getting more Ukrainians. There'll be 3 Ukrainians killed for every Russian. So all they're doing is aiding and abetting Russia in killing Ukrainians. That's all they're doing. That should be unconscionable to them. But how many of them are really military professionals? And how many of them have military staffs in their country that will go in and say, you have no clothes on, Mr. Emperor. You have no clothes. You're naked. We are not going to influence Ukraine to the point where they can win. Are you willing to march, Germany? Are you willing to march, France? Are you willing to march, Finland, Sweden, Norway? Are you willing to put soldiers in the field and go to Ukraine? And, oh, by the way, that would be a commencement of a world war. Are you willing to do that? I hope you're not. And besides, I don't think that would influence it even then to the point where Russia would have to back off. They just have to double down. And when Russia doubles down, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. All of Europe's in trouble. So I don't think that's going to happen. I go back to that same conversation I had with Powell in 1989 in Atlanta, Georgia, when he looked at me and he said, Mitterrand, Kohl, Thatcher, the Major, they're all gone. When Europe realizes that it has no leadership anymore, that it has its feet in World War II, and understands the debt it owes to the other side of the Atlantic, understands the situation, the way it developed, and the way America late but came to rescue them. When there's no one in Europe who understands that, NATO's gone. The transatlantic relationship is gone. We sense that, I think, and have tried to stop that gap or stop that breakup by creating all these side things like the Balkans, like Libya, in order to engage NATO forces and get them used to doing out-of-area operations and things like that, in order to put some cement back in where we knew the cracks were showing up and would show up even wider as leadership began to change in Europe, particularly in Germany and France and the bigger countries. That's going to happen. This has been a temporary cement, if you will, but it's very fragile and it's not going to last. I did a webinar with a Norwegian professor today, and I had done 2 more with Norwegians before that, one with a Swede and one with a Dane. And these are people who teach their version of national security in their schools in their countries. And they're all questioning why their governments changed decades-old policies, in some cases, Finland and Sweden and Norway, for example, of neutrality, and suddenly flooded into NATO, or ran into NATO. The Norwegians said, we're going to have American troops on Norwegian bases, and the status of forces agreements allows those American forces to be independent of the Norwegian forces on whose base they are resident. That means judicial matters. You kill somebody in Norway and you're a Marine or a soldier, you get tried in U.S. courts. You don't get tried in the Norwegian courts. That's the status of forces agreement we did in secret with the Norwegians, so we could put bases on their bases. This is unheard of in Norway. So there's a whole bunch of Norwegians who don't like this very much. You might call them traditional Norwegians. I agree with them. I think it's nonsense that we're creating these kind of ties at a time when all of these ties are going to go pop, 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 pop. They're going to go away, and they're going to go away rather rapidly, and it's going to be injurious to both sides as they go away so acerbically, so poisonously, and rather than sort of melting away over time. The dissolution of NATO is very short future, I think. And it's mostly because of Washington's overreach, of Washington's inability to understand where the world is now. It's a multipolar world with 3 distinct poles in this order of power: China, U.S., Russia. Now, find a little niche of power somewhere and you can put the U.S. back on top. But overall power, China's on top. U.S. is a very close second. Russia is a distant third, but nonetheless, with nuclear weapons and the stockpile they are a pole. The rest, even the so-called BRICS minus Russia, they're getting pretty, heady themselves. They're able to do things and influence public opinion, international opinion, and do things themselves. We're seeing that with their condemnations of Israel. So the world's multipolar now. And John Mearsheimer and others like him, they think that's a dangerous world. When it's multipolar, we'll have alliances here, and everybody will wind up, going to war. I don't agree. I don't agree at all. I think we have 2 situations, nuclear weapons and the climate crisis, that existentially require collaboration and cooperation. And if we don't do that, kiss us goodbye. The planet will continue, but we won't be here. Like the dinosaurs, we won't be here. If we don't have cooperation, we don't have collaboration, and we don't have people sitting down with the requisite scientists and saying, okay, we're the first human generation in 5,000 years to be existentially threatened as a race. We have the technology and the knowledge to save ourselves from this catastrophe. Do we have the wisdom to do it? The answer to that question to this point has been no. We need to change that answer.
Do you think, are we going to have these changes in the U.S. national security in which they're talking about democracies and autocracies instead of talking about cooperation?
Especially when you're not really a functioning democracy. We're a farce in that regard, an absolute farce. If we are anything categorically in terms of political science and the way nations are led, we're an oligarchy. We are a corporate oligarchy. Just look at the power. Look at where the money is. Look at where the money comes from that goes and influences our legislature, goes and influences our Supreme Court. My God, we have Supreme Court justices who go off on gigs with billionaires. I mean, we are a corporate oligarchy. We're exactly what Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia in 1773 or something like that wrote about. If we ever gave, and he actually used this kind of language, if we ever
time to realize at these echelons of power at which I was working, what was happening to my country. I'd been privy to much of it on the outside, as it were, because as a lieutenant colonel and a colonel in the Army, you brush up against it a lot, but unless you're very, very acute at absorbing these sorts of things, you just let it wash over your back and you go about doing your duty. But when I became assistant to Colin Powell, when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, arguably the most powerful military man in the world, and then later chief of staff, as you said, when he was Secretary of State, I was really exposed to it, to the heart of the beast, if you will. And I didn't like the way that heart beat. After I left the State Department, I made it this was early 2005, I made it a mission, if you will, of mine to find out how we got to the point where we had never been in our national or pre-national history, where a president of the United States actually authorized torture of other human beings. That issue really troubled me. And I knew we'd tortured in the Philippines. I knew we'd tortured in Vietnam. I knew we'd tortured elsewhere, probably massively during the Indian Wars, so-called Indian Wars. But I didn't ever find in our history, and I don't think anyone else would either, that we had sanctioned torture at the highest level of the government, a presidential edict. And that's what we've done. I discovered that.
And how did you discover it? So previously you thought maybe these things are happening, because of the circumstances and lower level decisions, etc. But you discovered that it was on a very high level, actually.
Yes. I even, much to my chagrin, discovered that perhaps with regard to what was called by the CIA, our Central Intelligence Agency, the high value detainee program, my boss, Colin Powell, might have even been privy to it, which really disturbed me because he had vouchsafed to me a number of times after it was revealed, the photographs came out of Abu Ghraib actually in May of 2004, that he had no knowledge of it whatsoever. In fact, he made me his confidant and his right-hand man in discovering what had happened. So that's one reason why I discovered what had happened. I was charged by the Secretary of State in these words, quote, LW, I want you to give me the tick-tock. I want to know how we got here. I want the chronology. I want to know who said what to whom. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, has set up Admiral Church in the Pentagon to do the same thing for him. We're looking for how we got to this spot. And so for the next 5-6 months, that was a large part of my portfolio to examine how we got there. I got to look at all the classified documents. Frankly, the declassified and unclassified documents that came from open sources like the New Yorker, Jane Mayer at the New Yorker, for example, the New York Times investigative reporters, others helped me as much as, if not more than, the classified material. But by the time I left the State Department and joined a couple of organizations, one of them the Constitution Project here in Washington, that were doing the same thing I had done and had interviewed hundreds of people all across the globe, I got a very, very vivid insight into, and then a tick-tock, really, of what happened with regard to torture and how the president had authorized it.
But are you saying that Colin Powell, when he asked you that, actually knew already before that or not?
I think what happened, and he's passed away now, of course, and I'll never get this absolutely accurately, but I think what happened was he knew because of Condi Rice, the national security advisor who was talking to him regularly. He knew about the 13 or 14 individuals who were in the so-called high-value detainee torture program, authorized by the president to be conducted by the CIA, no one else, just the CIA. He did not know that Donald Rumsfeld had taken great umbrage at that and was not very trusting of the CIA with regard to their ability to extract good, actionable intelligence, torture or otherwise. And so he started his own program. And that's what got to Iraq, to Afghanistan, to Africa. It got everywhere that the U.S. military was this military torture program. I don't think he was aware of that. He was so angry that day he revealed to me that these photographs were coming out, photographs of Abu Ghraib in Iraq, that I think that was genuine anger. They had contaminated his armed forces, and he was not happy about that. So I think he knew about the very small, high-value detainee program, which included people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for example.
Yes.
But he didn't know about Rumsfeld having contaminated the military with largely the same thing.
So this, you only mentioned like one part of it, like the torture program, but of course you've been explaining a lot about the whole setup of the Iraq war and the whole pretext that was created in order to be able to attack Iraq, etc. So there's a lot that you can say is very worrisome. What kind of conclusions do you make after your time in the military? Where does it go wrong? Where does the U.S. policy go wrong in, for instance, deciding to attack a country like Iraq?
Well, my specialty as a professor, my discipline as a professor was World War II on and study of national security decision-making in that period, roughly from Harry Truman all the way through, at that particular time when I ceased teaching, all the way through Bill Clinton. And a little bit of Barack Obama, although, as you might imagine, the archives were not quite as full of principal documents as they were for the previous ones. And so what I had discovered was the contamination that began to happen, and contamination is the right word, of that decision-making process by everything from oligarchical wealth to domestic politics. And then I discovered in my academic pursuit of this linear history, I discovered what happened after 9/11. And of course, I was also privy to most of that personally.
Yes.
And 9/11 put the cap on it. 9/11 was the accelerant, major accelerant of the abuse of power and of the almost imperial connotation of national security decision-making that began to happen after 9/11 that was already gestating after World War II. I mean, after World War II, we were the new Rome. There was no question of that. And the 1947 National Security Act essentially put the new Rome into motion, but it put it into motion with certain checks and balances. And the first president was very good at manipulating and using those checks and balances, Dwight Eisenhower. So we had 8 years of almost no war. And we had 8 years of probably the best economic situation the American people have ever confronted. But it was there, it was latent, it was ready to come out. And if you read the deliberations about the 1947 National Security Act, you see people making comments in those deliberations who are now triumphant in our republic. They now more or less influence national security decision making.
Is this the contamination you're talking about?
Yes.
And what does it look like? What is it? What are these people saying?
It looks like Richard Cheney. It looks there are Richard Cheneys present at the creation, if you will. That 1947 National Security Act was tempered by Harry Truman, and as I said later, by Dwight Eisenhower in terms of executive power and implementation. But if you don't have that kind of experience and you don't have that kind of talent at the top, then soon that gets out of hand and people don't know how to manage that kind of power, or worse, or managing it for other than national purposes. They're managing it for political purposes, for personal purposes.
And which are
And
the
that's
main, which are the main interests that try to influence this?
Well, the biggest one now, unquestionably, and it is completely out of hand, is corporate interests. And the decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to more or less make corporations the equivalent of people is just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a very powerful tip because it now allows billions upon billions of black money, dollars that aren't in any way responsible to anyone, to flow into our political process. And those dollars are dominating our political process. Trump was not just a phenomenon of a lot of distaste and unease amongst the American people for the political process. It was also paid for. It was paid for by billionaires like Charles Koch, Sheldon Adelman, and a host of others out there who have corrupted our political process with money. Nothing corrupts a political process more abjectly and more profoundly than the kinds of money that's began to flow into politicians' coffers in this country.
So money is the main driver, you think, behind many of the foreign policy choices?
It is, and it's not money in the sense that a lot of people would think I'm sticking that in my back pocket and I'm going away with it. I'm going to have a good life down in the Riviera or whatever. No, it's money to do more of what they want to do, which is wield power on a global basis. And the national security strategy now, for example, is a direct reflection of that. Most Americans don't even know what I'm talking about. But it's not even a classified document. They can
you explain a bit then for people?
Well, that national security strategy says essentially that we are going to bash with our military anyone in the world that even looks like they want to challenge us, no matter where they are or who they are. That's what that strategy says. And essentially, because we are blessed with $33.6 trillion of aggregate debt right now, and the interest payments on that debt are going to be $1 trillion plus next year, we're letting others do it for us, like Ukraine, like Israel.
So, but are you saying that this national security policy is actually, as a document, being used, or is it just, has it become mentality of people, internalized?
You don't need to have a document like that if you have people who have internalized it anyway. The document is just a reflection, actually, of what they've internalized, and that's what we have now. That's what we have now.
If we look at the war, first in Israel-Palestine, the attack on Gaza, maybe first, can you describe what's actually going on in your perspective? And then we can talk about how what you just explained, the interests, the special interests, let's say, as influence on the US politics, how it works there. How is it at work at the moment? But first, the question, in your estimation, what is taking place? Like, there's a lot of confusion, of course, of people try to, there's of course a lot of opposition to what Israel does and a lot of demonstrations, but there's also people saying, yeah, this is necessary. We have to defeat Hamas and they are terrorists. But what is your description of what's actually going on?
What's going on is what has been going on since the 1982 invasion of Lebanon by the group of Israelis who now are triumphant in Jerusalem. That was the last occasion where, with one exception, where an American president actually made a phone call and did some things that actually got Israel to do what the American president wanted them to do, which was ultimately to evacuate Lebanon. And we wound up losing 242 Marines in a hotel there as a consequence of that.
Yep.
Next president to do anything was H.W. Bush, who after the full first Gulf War had gained some leverage over Israel and forced them into the Oslo process using that leverage. Then came the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, which was more or less orchestrated by Bibi Netanyahu. All you have to do is watch the film made by two Israeli filmmakers who used about a third of the film as actual video, including video of the assassination, to know that Bibi Netanyahu had much to do with stirring up the crowds that produced the assassin and knew damn well what he was doing while he was doing it. All of this to say that in 2004, when Ariel Sharon, well, Bibi was financial minister, Ariel Sharon came to Washington and met with George Bush in the Oval Office, and George Bush essentially said to him, the 40 years of the peace plan, the two-state solution, the roadmap, and everything else is all bull. It's all garbage, hadn't accomplished a thing. So over to you. And the look on Sharon's face was, priceless. Mr. President, I mean, it's over to you. Whatever you do, we'll back you. And we have been doing that ever since, whether it's Barack Obama or whomever. We have been backing Israel ever since in whatever it wants to do. Well, then the question becomes, what do they want to do? They want to do the same thing that little insight in 1982 provided, which is eradicate the Palestinians. Bibi Netanyahu has been slowly doing that ever since he's been prime minister in the West Bank, in the Golan Heights, in East Jerusalem now increasingly, and now in Gaza. His plan was to do it slowly over time, turn it over to another prime minister who might be from Likud, who would be from Likud. They'd make sure of that, because these are all Likudniks. Peace party's dead in Israel. And eventually wake up one morning with the United States having acquiesced in the complete expulsion of the Palestinians from any land that Israel had any interest in, from the river to the sea. What the Hamas attacks of 7 October did was accelerate that plan. Now, as it happened, there was no strategy for taking advantage of that attack. But they developed, if nothing else, they're fast strategists. They developed a strategy quickly. And that strategy was, let's put what we were doing on speed. Let's put it on cocaine. Let's back that up with a little heroin. Let's really go. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. Let's eradicate all the Palestinians. So we continue the pogroms that they were already conducting in the West Bank with Ben Gvir's settlers. They are now arming the settlers with state-of-the-art Israeli military weapons. They were using pitchforks and shotguns and things like that. Let's move it into East Jerusalem and put it on high speed. Let's do it in the Golan. Let's do it everywhere. Let's push what we can't kill into Jordan from the West Bank. And let's push what we can't kill in Gaza into the Sinai or even into Egypt until they protest so strongly that they might violate the treaty, and then we'll back off a little bit and we'll just keep them in the desert. And besides, we're going to kill as many of them as we can. That's his strategy now. I call it the strategy of eradication. And that's what he's doing. And we're acquiescing in it. The United States is acquiescing in it.
Many people around the world call this ethnic cleansing, genocide, war crimes. Would you put any sort of legal term to this as well, yourself?
Well, I saw when Secretary Powell tried to get President Bush to declare genocide in southern Sudan, and finally talked him into it. And then I saw how meaningless that really was. I mean, we finally came to somewhat of a solution, an interim solution, as it turns out, because problems are back again. And so calling something genocide under the convention, it might make you feel good. But unless the world is willing to do something with regard to the penalties that exist for genocide, it's meaningless. It's like Mao Zedong said about international law. International law comes out of the barrel of a gun.
That's very interesting. But would you, regardless of the use of it, would you see this as genocidal?
It is genocidal. It is genocidal. At best, it's ethnic cleansing par excellence. And at worst, it's genocide.
So I wonder, in your time in office, have you been privy to these contacts with the Israeli military, the Israeli politicians, etc.? And what is the actual relationship? Because it's for many people quite of a kind of a mystery. By the way, it was also a mystery how strong we are behind Ukraine, and I would like to ask you later about that. But of course, the relationship with Israel goes much further. It seems that no matter what Israel does, US will back them up. Have you been present to these meetings? How do they go? Is there any sort of criticism to between the parties, or?
I was present when Mossad took over the number 3 man in the U.S. Department of Defense's office, Douglas Feith, himself a dual citizen, and in my view, a spy for Israel. Number 3 man in the Pentagon took over his office for the entire duration of the first Iraq War that I was in government. They came and went without any security. No one had to pass through the river entrance security. No one had to do anything like the normal citizen has to do to get into the Pentagon. They occupied Douglas Feith's office 24/7. That's how much influence Israel had on the Department of Defense during the war in
quite
Iraq.
extreme.
There's a book coming out. There's a book coming out. It's written by a Command Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Derek Fritz, who's now a good friend of mine. And it's called Deadly Betrayal, a very apt title. And he was in that office, and he's spilling the beans on that office. It won't make any difference because everyone in the security complex knows that Israel is a different animal. We do not deal with Israel like we deal with any other nation on earth. Indeed, we don't deal with Israel like we've ever dealt with any other nation on earth.
It is, I mean, it's one thing to sort of protect one country politically, etc., but it's quite a different thing to allow Secret Service of another country in your offices and run the show. How come Israel has so much leverage over the US?
There's the Republican, and truth in advertising here, I'm still a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Republican answer that if Israel didn't do it, and this includes killing the Palestinians, we'd have to do it. And therefore, we love Israel because she does it well, and she does it on our behalf. And that's everything from their fear that, like Putin's fear of Chechnya, that and the brutal way he treated Chechens. It's everything from our fear of terrorists coming out of that region, and particularly out of that conglomeration from Hamas to ISIS to Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba, a lot of the terrorist groups. They're the ones that we fear the most. We think Israel is our battleship, as it were, in the Levant, and if we didn't have her there to bash people periodically, we'd have to be doing it. And therefore, we keep the relationship very, very warm. Mm-hmm. It's that plus guilt from the Holocaust, a lot of very influential American Jews who have lots of money and funnel it into Israel. And of late, another phenomena is the phenomena most exemplified by John Hagee, who's head of Christians United for Israel. Many of the settlers owe their existence and their ability to continue to exist to John Hagee and his Christians United for Israel, because they send millions of dollars to the West Bank and elsewhere to finance these settlements and the settlers that constitute them. Mm-hmm. This is an interesting relationship, very interesting, because Hagee in his more open moments will tell you that at the rapture, when Christ descends to the earth, all the unbelievers will be killed. And when you ask him, does that include the Jews? He usually makes some really clever remark like, oh, they'll convert at the last minute. But of course, Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and those boys, they know that Hagee is nuts. And they know that the Christians who follow him are nuts. And there's no rapture. There's no Christ going to descend to the earth. So they just tolerate it because hundreds of millions of dollars come over there to finance their settlement activity.
Quite useful idiots in that sense. Then.
Yes, yes, very much so. I'm sure Netanyahu just laughs in his cups every day.
It's incredible. But people wonder sometimes, who controls who? Is the US controlling Israel, or is Israel controlling the US? Would that last statement, would you go as far as saying that, or is that too much to say?
With Joe Biden, I would say that. With Joe
Mhm.
Biden, I would say that. And I don't know if I'm really telling you Joe Biden as much as I'm telling you that he's so old, he's lost it. And Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and others are the people we're talking about, particularly Blinken.
Yeah. 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 It's just very it's quite shocking what you say, actually, and it's for me to me it remains quite absurd that we give another country so much leverage over our own policies. What I'm worried about also is that as I'm talking from a European perspective, the Netherlands. We seem to also all go along. The all of Europe, all of NATO countries, and outside of NATO, the Western countries, we all join this same bandwagon. And I've also asked it to other people, like in your experience, is there any way of, there's a lot of social of course, there's also in the Netherlands, there are Zionist people and who love to join Israel and whatever it does, but there's a lot of opposition. But it's quite hard to imagine how this kind of opposition would ever sort of break through, considering the fact that we are used to following the US when it comes to foreign policy. And I was just wondering, what would happen if a country like the Netherlands, in theory, because it's quite far in reality, but in theory would decide not to follow this suit anymore? Like, would there be repercussions for the Netherlands?
I think what you're talking about is something that I've been talking about briefly with some of my scholarly friends, and also with people like John Mearsheimer and others. I think what we're seeing is what we manufactured post-Cold War. We manufactured the leaders you have in Europe right now, from Germany to Finland to Norway. And when I say we manufacture them, we have had people working on your politics for a long time, because we saw the end of the Cold War ending our hegemony over Europe, particularly our economic hegemony. Not necessarily our security hegemony, but that would come with the economic hegemony being undermined. That's one reason we're supporting the Ukraine conflict, because it gives us an opportunity, especially over the major power in Europe, Germany, to reestablish our economic hegemony. Look at what we've done to Germany's economy by just simply by blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines. Whether we did it personally or not, it was our intent to do it. So I think that's part of it. Stoltenberg, we engineered Stoltenberg. We engineered him just as if we reached in and picked him out of his home and put him in the Secretary Generalship of NATO.
But how does it work? Because
it's economic influence. It's bringing the hammer down in terms of economic power. It's all manner of different methodologies. I watched some of it work quite effectively. Thank you very much. And I think we're looking at, as I've said before, the imminent dissolution of NATO once Europe wakes up to this. You look at the alternative to Deutschland party in Germany right now, which is polling number 2. And that's a little bit scary because they're mostly East Germans, and they're more interested in, shall we say, the same sorts of things that maybe some people were interested in 1933 and 34, who later took over Germany. That's a little bit scary, but they are a reflection, I think, of this angst and this anger with what the current party in Germany that's in power has manifested, especially with regard to the destruction of the economy and what the lack of cheap energy has done to the economy. So I think we're looking at maybe another 5-6 years for NATO and the transatlantic relationship, maybe even not that, and then the dissolution of it, because people are going to understand what you were just saying, but it's not going to be inchoate, and it's not going to be a few peaceniks, as it were. It's going to be the bulk of the populations that understand that. Colin Powell said to me in 1989 when I first joined him, he said, "Larry, in just a few, maybe a decade or two, the Kohls, the Mitterrands, the Majors, the Thatchers, the people who have their feet in World War II, even though those feet might have been 12 years old or whatever, they're going to be gone. And when they're gone, Europe's going to wake up. 740 million people with a GDP the equivalent of ours now, $23 trillion. They're going to wake up and they're going to realize that being in tow of the United States, while it might look good for security purposes, it's not. And so we're going to have a whole different world. I think Ukraine has slowed that down to a certain extent because Putin scared people. Even though Sergei Lavrov, Putin have said over and over again, Putin's actual statement was, this is not about territory, it's about security. I believe him. He's right. It is about security. We're in his sphere of influence, and he doesn't like that. I don't blame him. I don't excuse his attack on Ukraine, but he's justified in doing it. We made him do it. We compelled him to do it. He gave us ample warning in Georgia when my president, George W. Bush, went to Tbilisi and with Saakashvili right beside him in a public square said, "You will be a member of NATO very soon." And then what did Russia do? That should have been an indicator to us that, you know, when you get in Russia's sphere of influence that directly, they're going to do something. Now, they could have gone on to Tbilisi and taken Georgia if they wanted to, but he didn't want Georgia. What the hell would he want Georgia for? And what the hell would he want Ukraine for? Got enough problems. So it's not about territory, it's about security. So Biden the other day is saying that, I'm sorry, if you don't approve this package of aid for Ukraine, he's going to attack another NATO country. There's a lie right there. Ukraine's not a NATO country. He's going to attack. That's what the president said. He's going to attack another NATO country. You know, crazy, just insane. And then Lloyd Austin going over to the Congress and saying, you know, we're going to have to put U.S. soldiers on the ground in Ukraine if you don't approve this aid package. I've got news for Lloyd Austin. He needs to check his army. His army is so small right now, and we can't even recruit for that army. We were short last year. We were short this year. I keep telling people it's smaller than the army of Bangladesh. And they point out to me and say, well, Bangladesh only has 160,000. No, you haven't paid any attention to Bangladesh. It's by India. You know that big country it's by? Bangladesh has 2 million militia who have weapons and can show up. And you know, that's a formidable array of people because they are good soldiers. They are going to show up if the Indians do anything that's inimical to their interests. So I don't know what's gotten into our leaders. Our leaders are not only acting like the world's greatest imperialists, but they're doing it at a time when they have no money and no forces of consequence behind them, other than the Air Force and the Navy, which would, in a war with China, for example, very quickly be attrited.
Yeah, so like, if I look to the Netherlands and I hear what you say, like there will come a moment when people in Europe start to realize that our trust on the US, also in terms of security, etc., in terms of economic safety, etc., is misplaced. But at the moment, I'm quite scared of the prospect that, of course, there will be unrest because things are not fine economically, etc. But my doubt is very much if that unrest will be focused towards like a correct analysis of how things are. And because, of course, politicians and media are always capable of manipulating unrest towards other sort of causes of their problems. Nowadays, it's like Muslims, like in the Netherlands, a big party won also, like it looks like Alternatieven voor Deutschland, but they're not so much anti-American, but they put all the blame on Hamas in this case. Well, they used all that imagery of terrorism, etc., to say all Muslims are bad. So I'm more afraid of that than I think a part of the population has already woken up to the fact that the US is maybe not our best protector, etc. But I think the most of the anger will be channeled towards like more violent ideologies, etc. That's what I'm afraid of.
That's what I'm afraid of too, because it looks like that is a tendency all across the globe. The dissatisfaction does not lead to more democracy in a phrase. It leads to more authoritarianism.
Exactly. So, but if we talk about the military might of the US that you have just criticized, can it handle conflict, like maybe first the conflict in the Middle East? Do you expect the conflict to widen, or do you expect what are the repercussions for this? Because I'm wondering, can Netanyahu just fulfill his plan of eradicating Palestinians from Israeli territory without any repercussions? I mean, there's these big ships of the US around. They're scaring. They have their Samson option, as you know, the threat of nuclear attack on one of their neighbors. Like, will Israel be able to complete Bibi's dream of killing as many Palestinians as possible without repercussions, or will there be both for the US and for Israel repercussions in the long run or short run?
Well, I think that even more so than Ukraine, which is boiled down now to just a horrible stalemate, which if Putin decides to take advantage of, could go the way some of the more ardent people are saying it might go. In other words, Putin could change his mind about not wanting any of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
The dynamics of war sometimes do that. I think the situation in Gaza is ripe for what you just suggested, that it could widen dramatically, and it could wind up being a much worse conflict than we contemplate right now, even though in its little kernel of Netanyahu's brutalization of the Palestinians, it's quite disgusting.
Mm.
And I say that because you have an array of characters now that we haven't really heard from before, not the least of whom is the previous southern anchor of NATO, Turkey, the largest land army in NATO, the most powerful land army in NATO, much more powerful than the United States. Were that land army to, shall we say, get angry enough to march down through Lebanon and Syria, and I doubt even Bashar al-Assad would put up much opposition, especially if it were marching on Jerusalem, as it were, you would have a whole new dynamic. And what would happen then?
But if they haven't done it by now, I mean, the atrocities have been already so huge.
Yep.
So
if
they haven't happened,
But the reason they would do it would not be because of the atrocities. There are a number of things that are driving Erdogan. One is that, and he's shown this for a long time, he's in competition with Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh to be the leader of the Muslim world. They've been vying back and forth. He was vying with the Ayatollahs in Iran, and they've pretty much lost now. They have been delegitimized by their own women, if you will. The government in Tehran is just waiting to be overthrown. The question in my mind is, it's probably going to be the IRGC that overthrows them, and then a military dictatorship, and their national security interests won't change. So what's that going to mean? But the women delegitimize that government, and that government knows it, and it's desperate right now. It's making deals with Riyadh even because it's desperate. But back to Erdogan, he wants that leadership. Listen to his addresses to his own parliament almost every day now. He is setting things up to make sure that he has the claim on that leadership role of the Muslim world that no one can contest in the future anytime soon. And he's using this situation in Gaza to do that. If he's the only one, if he feels like at a ripe moment in here that he needs to do something concrete, not just spout words, then it could change the whole dynamic. And my question to a member of the administration recently was, what will you do if he not only backs away from NATO, which I think he's done now. I think he said to the EU, he said, a pox on your house for eternity. I do not want to be a member. And he's probably saying the same thing to NATO. What does that mean? Is he going to be a neutral? Is he going to align with the new axis in the world that's developing rapidly between Beijing and Moscow? Is he going to be a brick? What's he going to do? Well, one thing I know he's going to do is try to maintain that leadership of the Muslim world, and that's going to require some concrete action probably before long, especially if the rest of them just sit around like El Sisi MBS and others and just pontificate about the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much worse it's going to get. One of my friends said last night to me when I said that at dinner, can it get any worse? I said, oh, yes, it can. Why do you think they did that airdrop outside Khan Yunis? Well, there's one of two reasons that it could be. One, there are landlines of resupply from the tanks on the border into Khan Yunis are so perilously dangerous that they had to drop the supplies in.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's only 7 tons, as I understand it, which is not a lot, but for the IDF, that's a bit. Or they are trying to speed up the killing, and they're not doing it fast enough with land supply routes, so they use an air supply route to make it that much faster. And either way, that's not a good sign, because it means that he is deadly serious about the 1.8, 2 million that are left, and now mostly packed in southern Gaza, although many of them are now going back north to get away from the carnage in the south. And there's nothing in the north for them. There are no hospitals, there are no refugee camps of no water, no food. So the eradication campaign seems to be well underway, and the statements Netanyahu keeps making make me think that he's deadly serious and he's going to carry this out to the last dead Palestinian. I don't know what the rest of the world's going to do about that. Are they going to do their usual thing and just kind of accept it and go about their business and condemn it periodically in rhetoric when they can? Or are they going to take some kind of action? And if they're going to take some kind of action, what is that action going to be, and what's the U.S. going to do? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the question for me is, too, what are we going to do ourselves?
And do you have any premonition, any pre-feeling what?
No, but I'm coupled with Ukraine. I'm worried about 2 major issues.
Mm-hmm.
One is that we, the empire, we, Washington, D.C., have abrogated every nuclear weapons treaty in the world. There are none left. We now are at a point where Vladimir Putin is talking about leaving the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And this, I think, is what adds to our work with Europe to convince them to stay under our umbrella, is the nuclear situation. Because they understand that everything's gone. There's nothing left. Why did he leave the CTBT, or why is he possibly going to leave it? Well, Xi Jinping has decided to build out his nuclear weapons complex to at least the number necessary to ride out a first strike. We hear from the strategic party, from the Central Party School strategists, we hear it's probably around 2,000. They only got about 600 right now. That's a large build out. He wants to do it fast. The way you do that is with high-grade plutonium. Where's he going to get the high-grade plutonium? Oh, Vladimir Putin's got a lot of it. Japan's got the most and the best, but Russia's got the second most and second best. Well, what if Putin gave him plutonium to help him build out his nuclear complex? Then we've got a world with more nuclear weapons, more animosity amongst nuclear weapon states, and we've got 2 wars going on, neither one of which makes any sense at all. I'd be scared too if I were living in the Netherlands. And then on top of all of that, you got this farce at COP28 and a probable farce building for the next COP. And you got scientists saying this is crazy because we're going to 1.5, we're probably going to 2. You're not going to be able to live in a world with 2, most of you anyway, unless technology develops some really incredible things between now and then. And we're not talking about the then being more than about 2065, which is just around the corner. You've got these 2 monumental existential challenges confronting all of us, not just Russia or China or Israel, all of us. And we're doing nothing about it. We're frittering away our money and our power in Gaza and Ukraine. It's nonsensical.
How big is the risk? I mean, it's clear and obvious now to everyone who's observing that Ukraine is losing big, and NATO cannot really resolve this issue. And they talk about the stalemate as some sort of solution, which, I mean, as you've said, it is probably not a real stalemate, but it's something that Putin can use.
People are still dying. Yeah, on both sides, people are still dying.
So when the threat that Biden and I think also Austin made of Americans probably fighting if we do not if we do not continue funding Ukraine, how big of a risk do you see there of a real escalation in direct conflict between NATO countries and Russia?
I hope the sanity of the NATO councils is such that that's not going to happen. And I mean that. I mean Macron, I mean Schultz, I mean all the leaders in the various countries that really count. In fact, the entire array, although now that we've expanded NATO, we have criminal states in NATO now. Mm-hmm. Montenegro is the automobile capital, the stolen automobile capital of the world, and Albania is the criminal capital of the world outside Pyongyang. I mean, more crime goes on. They could not possibly meet the criteria for membership in NATO, which is in some areas stricter than membership in the EU, but we let them in. This is insanity. Exactly. But yeah, it happened, and for various reasons, one of which was so Lockheed Martin could sell F-16s to Poland and various other things like that.
Poland warned that we had 3 years to prepare for an attack by Putin.
Yeah, I don't think Vladimir Putin is that stupid. I really don't. I think his concern, as John Mearsheimer has said many times, I like John's portrayal of it. Mm-hmm. He's a maximum realist. Mm-hmm. His concern is his sphere of influence. His concern is Russia's security and his security. Mm-hmm. And you can't walk up to within 600 miles of Moscow with ballistic missile defenses that can be converted into short-range nuclear missiles in 24 hours and not concern him. It's clear to me as a military professional why he was concerned, and the fact that we did it, to me, is just ludicrous. William Jefferson Clinton was just a moron in terms of national security, or taking so much money from the military-industrial complex that he didn't have any other choice. But he's the one who started all this. He's the one that put it in full motion and took Colin Powell and George H.W. Bush's idea. We were talking to Shevardnadze and Gorbachev about being members of NATO.
Exactly.
That was our idea of expanding NATO. We wanted Russia to be a member of the alliance. Yes. And Yeltsin came along and said, yeah, in his drunken stupors, he was able occasionally to say, yeah, I agree. But Gorbachev and Shevardnadze were rather excited about it, as were the former Warsaw Pact military heads, whom Powell talked to quite often. Yes. When Moiseyev came to the United States and Powell went to Russia, they had these exchanges where it looked pretty good in 1992, 1993. Yes. And then all of a sudden, along comes Bill Clinton, and it all becomes inimical to Russia. And that's when these people came out of the woodwork who've always lived with us, that I was talking about, the Dick Cheneys and Victoria Nulands and others.
Yes. Well, I think we can agree that we live in a very dangerous time. And as I said before our talk, privately, like it's quite it's quite scary to see how things are escalating all around us, and we don't have the security of knowing that we have wisdom leading us, but very ulterior motives and interests that are not necessarily in the interest of the people. What kind of I know it's a major question, and I know we talked about two major conflicts in the Middle East and in Ukraine. We've talked about the way the military decision-making, political decision-making about foreign policy works. What can ordinary people do in such situations? It may be a strange question, but
no, I get it all over. I've been in all 50 of our states in the last decade, and that's the one question I get almost all the time. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes get despondent and cynical, and I say, well, you've let it happen. This is a democracy. And as far as I know, most of the countries you live around too are democracies.
Yes. Yeah.
And if they get into bad situations, then the people haven't been attentive. They haven't done the kinds of things that they should do. They haven't elected the kind of leaders that they should elect. They haven't paid enough attention to the critical issues of the day. And I understand, I tell Americans this too, I understand you got children, you got a job, you got to keep your job. It's a dicey time. COVID affected everyone in a negative way all across the country. We still have people driving in this country like they're morons. We don't have any police out to speak of because we've disenchanted our police forces. I haven't seen a police cruiser in my neighborhood in 2 years. I used to see a police cruiser here 2-3 times a day. That's what we've done to our police forces, and we're paying for it. We're paying for it. You're going to see some horrible statistics coming out.
Do you think people understand enough about the world in order to know what they should change? It's quite complex.
No, that's another thing we've done in this country, and I suspect others have similar problems, though I don't think Europe, from my studies, has as deep a problem as we do. We have annihilated, and my Republican Party has been largely politically responsible for this, our public school system. So we have citizens who are increasingly ignorant, dumb, stupid, pick your term. And people ask me to explain the 70 million that voted for Donald Trump. I say, go back to General Grant's speech to the Society of Tennessee, the Society of the Army of Tennessee in September, as I recall, 1875, when he said, the free school, and he meant by that the public school, the free school is what will keep this nation sound. And we've destroyed it in this country. We've destroyed it. Only the rich get a good education in this country now.
And of course, what I would call the education of adults, which is the media, no? I mean,
yes.
It's similar process has taken place, like the dumping down of the masses through,
Our media is a joke today. It's a joke. The alternative media, like what's on the net and so forth, that which is positive of it is the new wave, if you will, that my students, that's all they watch. They don't read the New York Times. They don't read the Washington Post. They don't read Le Monde. They don't read El País. They don't read the London Financial Times. They get it all off the web. And whatever their predilections are before they look at it, they're reinforced by what they get off the web.
So basically, you point back at ourselves. We should have seen things coming that are coming our way. But now some things are really also entrenched, I would say, in the system and how things work. Is there any other, apart from informing ourselves and maybe politically organizing ourselves, is there a way to turn back from the current escalatory measures that are and things that are going on in Ukraine and Gaza, etc.? Is there anything we can do to sort of stop the train towards more escalation and destruction?
Well, I remember a story that was told to me in I think I was in the State Department's Madison room at the time, the U.S. State Department's Madison room, and Dominique de Villepin was there, a French foreign minister at the time, and he was telling a story about how he didn't name anybody, but a particular French president was having a conversation one day with a group of advisors, and all of a sudden there was a sound outside on the street or the Concord or whatever it was, and he said he interrupted his conversation and walked over to the window, and he pulled the curtain back and he looked down at the street, and then he came back to the conversation, and someone in the group that he was having a conversation with asked him what's happening. He said, well, I had to go over there and see what it was because I have to find out where the people are going so I can follow them. Well, that needs to happen. You need some leaders going to the window to see where the people are going, and the people need to be going to the right place. I'm not saying that all politicians are that way, but they are. That's the beauty of democracy in some respects. They're compelled to do what it is the majority, or at least a sizable, powerful minority of their people want them to do.
Yep.
And we don't have a lot of that going on.
Mm.
And I watch some of it that does go on, the peace demonstrations and such. The most powerful demonstration I saw against war in my life was in London. I happened to be in London when that huge anti-Iraq war demonstration took place. I was told by the bobbies that they thought there were 1 million, 2 million people out on the streets.
Yes. Yeah.
That needs to happen.
Mm.
That needs to happen more. The people need to say, we're fed up, we're tired, we're sick of your leadership, we're sick of the Gaza war, we're sick of the war in Ukraine. Turn this off. I'm not saying it'll be successful, but it'll sure give a lot of people a lot more comfort when they go to bed at night that at least their democracy is functioning.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's very frightening to have leaders that comply with countries that want to commit genocide, etc. It really worries me that we are so silent, also at the Netherlands. And also we have our foreign minister is actually, she used to be a captain. She has been in the military, and she's been in Afghanistan, etc. It's sort of sad to see, like, she should know what war means. She should know what death and destruction mean, and she is silent. We try to make things good by providing humanitarian aid, and then be hush hush about the bombs that fall on Gaza. So yes, I will take it to heart, and I hope people will wake up more and more to what's going on.
I was in Sicily a few years ago with, I don't know if you ever knew Sir Nigel Rodley. He was international criminal justice genius. He'd been several I think he was the head of the tribunal for Sierra Leone. Brit, just